Sounds like synod.
Yeah,
the Lake of Faro setting it up.
Yeah, it does sound a bit like synod.
Sorry, I shouldn't.
No, don't worry, Ray, at all. But we come to this chapter 20, and like I say, it's a chapter that has both shaped and divided the Protestant church from its very beginnings. So far, John's vision has revealed to God's people, these 7 congregations, that their struggle will end. We've seen that in chapter 6, that the nations will come to Christ, chapter 7, that the Antichrist has been revealed or will be revealed, chapter 19, that the godless world system has been or will be destroyed, chapter 17 and 18, and that Jesus will come to rule and reign, chapter 19. And we must remember that John is writing both to the here and now to encourage the Christians who read this letter, but he's also looking forward to the future when things will be complete. And so there's this, we live in that time in between, as it were. And now as we come into chapter 20, we see John introduce this idea of 1,000 years, the millennium. And we see a number of things happen during this time. Satan is locked up for this period. And what appears to be a select few of the saints come to life, and they will reign with Christ for this period. But then it all appears to sort of go backward. Just as you think everything is settled, it all seems to fall apart. Satan is released and allowed to recruit a huge army. And just when we thought it was all over. And these 1,000 years have sort of caused 3 main groups or sort of theologies, ideologies to spring up. So we've got premillennialism. Now this holds that Christ will come and reign for 1,000 years. During the 1,000 years, God's people will experience God's promised blessings. The church today is not fully experiencing this, but we wait for it. So we don't live in the 1,000 years, we look forward to that. And this 1,000-year reign is an interim kingdom, and the final kingdom being experienced after the events of verses 7 to 15 of chapter 20. Then we've got amillennialism. Now this holds that the 1,000 years is symbolic of the time between Christ's first coming, born as a baby in Bethlehem, and his second coming, which we haven't yet experienced, but John sees. And so we now, you and me, the church today, we live in this millennium, this 1,000 years, and it's symbolic of a long time. So God's promises are being fulfilled now. Christ is ruling now, not on earth, but in heaven. And then the third major sort of theological view is post-millennialism. And this holds that the church is not the kingdom, but we will bring about the kingdom by preaching the gospel. Christ will not be on earth during this time, but will rule in the hearts of his people, and he will come at the end of this 1,000 years. And again, this 1,000 years are symbolic of a long time. And so in some ways, you know, we have to say which seems to be most plausible and which of those 3 are the ones that we're going to align ourselves with more sort of broadly than the other 2. So we've got premillennialism, amillennialism, so there's no 1,000 years, or postmillennialism, and you know where we choose is where we sit. So as we look at this chapter, verses 1 to 6 are all sort of okay. They fit with the flow. Satan is finally defeated, he's chained, and that's it. The saints start to raise. They might be symbolic of what we saw with the saints under the altar, and we've seen this small group before in Revelation. And so we sort of think that's okay, but we then have to ask the question, why, in verse 7, is Satan apparently allowed one last power grab? And it's really difficult to try and tease this out. Some commentators would suggest that Satan is released, as are all the others, to face judgment. And that his sort of seeking to deceive shows that his true nature, Paul tells us that he was a deceiver from the very beginning. So this, as soon as he's released for judgment, this sort of shooting off to deceive everybody shows that he has not and will not change, but that evil will continue at every opportunity to defy God. And then we see these who obviously have lived within the 1,000-year reign of Christ are clearly, some are deceived. They sort of become part of this vast army of Satan. Some commentators would say that's, we see reflections of this in things like the parable of the weeds and the wheat. They both look the same, let them both grow together, and at the full growth, the differences are obvious, whereas at the shoots stage, very difficult to tell them apart, the weeds and the wheat. It's only when they're full grown can we see, and only at that point can the two be separated. And so what we've seen, what some commentators would say, that it's the weeds, if you like, that then take sides with this last-ditch attempt, and yet they cannot escape judgment. And again, we've seen other passages throughout the New Testament and the Gospels, which would sort of support this, if I can put it like that. Paul talks about wolves in sheep's clothing. They will come amongst you like wolves in sheep's clothing, those who adopt the outward appearance of faith, and yet inside they seek to use it to their own gain. So I'm going to stop in a minute because it's quite a difficult chapter to tease out, and we can probably do that more through discussion. But we're reminded as it draws to a close with the books being opened, that judgment is based upon inner faith and outward action. And again, we've seen echoes of that in the likes of James as he writes, faith without deeds is dead. Paul, as he talks in some of his letters in Romans and the like, that our judgment, our life as a child of God is known through both our faith and our deeds. And so I'll stop there, and we can just have some time just to sort of chew over this chapter, which, like I say, has raised lots of theological dilemmas for the church.